Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm just going to wrap up some of the latest books that I've read. I've noticed my average is about one a week, which is pretty decent for someone with a 5-month-old baby. I mean, I have no complaints about that. But since my last wrap up video, the first book that I started reading was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And I've watched the movie many times, but never bothered to read the book. And I will say I enjoyed the movie a lot more. It's just one of those books where it wasn't a miss for me completely. I found it enjoyable and okay, but it wasn't a love. I'm not in love with this story or this book. Maybe I just came to it too late in life and I would have enjoyed it more maybe as a teenager or a kid even reading it. I feel like it's a book that I would enjoy reading to my daughters, but not one I would necessarily pick up and read on my own for my own enjoyment. But it was fine. It was okay. And it's a classic. And those are always sort of like hit and miss with people. I think there's sort of like an underlying guilt there that when you read a classic, you feel expected to love it. I don't know, maybe those are just my feelings, and I'm just projecting them onto a book, and maybe that's why I feel more disappointed by it, because it didn't really engage me as much as other books. It was interesting, it was okay, but it wasn't really a big love. But that happens, and that's okay. Now, the next book that I read, I can't show you because I listened to it from my library on audiobook, but it was A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. My handwriting's really messy. And that was just a book I checked out because I was in the mood for a thriller, because what's better than a thriller in spring? But I felt like getting spooked out. But what this book was about was basically a family who are trying to figure out if their oldest daughter has a mental health issue and she's schizophrenic, or if she's actually possessed by demons. And in the course of that, a TV company has caught wind of their story and decides to make a show out of it. So while they're trying to figure this out, they're also making money off of a reality TV show based around their daughter's issues. And it's all written from the perspective of the younger daughter, because there's two daughters, and it's the older sister who has the issues. It's all written from the younger sister's point of view. There were points of the book that were pretty creepy, and you're never quite sure throughout the story whether this girl is just deeply disturbed and she isn't getting the mental help that she needs, or if she is actually truly possessed by demons. It was interesting to write it and have it part of like a reality TV show, but I would say maybe that's my least favorite part of it, simply because some of the chapters were devoted to writing from a TV perspective. So you would have the story going along from the girl's perspective, and then suddenly it would jump to sort of like you're directing the show perspective, and it would be like camera pans left, zooms in on dad's worried faced, blah 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 blah, everyone's silent, oh something happened over here, pan, zoom in, zoom left. And that was just weird for me. I just wanted to get back to the real story from a character's perspective. So that wasn't the greatest thing. I will say though, the ending had a twist I didn't really see coming, and it was a pretty disturbing one. Overall, the book was okay. I think it tried to do like shock and awe type imagery and descriptions, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But it was a good, I guess, time waster of a book. Like, it was interesting enough, but not a love, and not a book that I'm gonna remember forever. And the last book that I finished reading, or recently finished reading, was The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner. And this was a nonfiction book. It was actually recommended to me by a friend. I listened to it on audiobook, but I guess it's sort of like a self-help type book, and it's about anger for women and how we as women aren't always in touch with our anger, or our anger isn't validated by other people because we're seen as or women are commonly seen as sort of irrational anyways and hormonal, and how that really does us a disservice, and how to get in touch with productive anger, not just yelling, screaming, blow up, but nothing gets resolved anger, but I guess learning to embrace your anger and calmly be able to tell people, this is how I feel, this is what I'm angry about, and just allowing those feelings to come out, but in a productive way, in a way that resolves issues. I found it very helpful. One of the first things that maybe it was in the introduction. One of the first things that I remember is she begins by saying how women are, when they get angry, they're called names, and we all know the common woman names that are called, and that even when men get angry or when men are disliked, their insults relate directly back to the feminine. So if people don't like a man and they call him a son of a you-know-what, it's directly relating back to his mother. It's still an insult on the feminine and not the man himself. Similarly, if you call a man a bastard, that implies that his mother was an unwed mother. It doesn't say he comes from an unwed father. A bastard is a term for a child from an unwed mother. So again, a direct insult back to the feminine. And I just thought that was really interesting and something that I've never noticed before. So, I don't know, I just appreciated hearing some of the stuff in the book. And now, just to put it into practice, I can think that's the hardest thing with reading these types of books, is you agree with what they're saying and how helpful it could be, but putting it into practice is a whole different thing. Now, the last book that I'm going to talk about, I actually haven't finished. I'm listening to it on audiobook, and I have about 30 minutes left, so hardly any time left at all. But it's called Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, and I know this was like a big book like in the last year or so. I saw a lot of people talking about it. So it's probably not one I would have picked up on my own. It's another like BookTube recommended read. But I'm glad I picked it up. And it's just a nonfiction. I say just as if it's just a nonfiction. It's actually pretty complex, and I don't feel like I could do it justice like talking about it, because I'm not well versed on topics like this. But it's a nonfiction book written by a guy who grew up as hillbilly, and he just writes sort of like a whole biography of his family, and kind of cuts back and forth, like examining why poor whites, maybe some of the things, the stereotypes that we associate with being a poor white hillbilly. And books like those are always so interesting to read too. I personally really enjoy, when I make the time to read those kinds of books, to read from maybe a perspective I can't completely identify with, and just try to understand the way people are, and maybe why they think the things they do, or they act the way they do. I think that's always valuable, to try to understand someone else, even if you wildly disagree with them. And I definitely agree with the whole premise of his book, that hillbillies are misunderstood. They definitely have a reputation for being a certain way, but he examines why that is, and why maybe it's hard for certain people to break out of the mold, how you kind of conform to what people think about you too. And it was just a really, really interesting book, or it's been a really interesting book. I'm not finished with it yet. Now, I don't know if he's going to get to this, or if there's something that's left out of the book, but I would really have appreciated it, or will appreciate it if it's in the book, if he would make a comparison between maybe different races and their economic class, and sort of compare and contrast the similarities and then the differences based off, where you're living, or your race, or gender, if that's part of it too, and just sort of so people could recognize more of what they have in common, and try to understand each other, and just why people sometimes act the way they do, and how a whole class of people can get stuck in their stereotype. People always want to bring up like the image of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps type deal, and like no excuses for being a certain way, but it really is. He really brings it to our attention that it is hard to break out of a mold that you've been born into. Certainly you aren't controlled by, your place of birth or the family you were born into, but to a certain extent, I mean, it does have a huge impact, and I can see why it's difficult for people of all different economic classes and races to break out of the negative of whatever class that they're in, or whatever stereotypical way that their family is associated being. I feel like I'm butchering my words here. I'm trying to get my thoughts out, and it's just coming out in a jumble, but I feel like you guys understand what I'm trying to say. I just think it's interesting, and we just need to be more empathetic and just try to understand each other. One thing that I've noticed a lot in the last year is really how similar we all are. We all have so many like wildly different experiences, but if we try to understand each other and find common ground, I think we would really be surprised about how similar we all are, and how much, we all have the same basic needs and wants. And if we didn't focus so much on our differences, recognize the differences and be empathetic to someone's different experiences, definitely, but also really try to focus hard on just our similarities and how we're all people in the end. I feel like I'm getting really cliche here, but it's true. It's true. Just something to keep in mind. But those are the books I have read and am reading and have enjoyed. Nothing's blown me out of the water in the last month or so, but I don't regret reading any of the books that I have. If you've read any of the books that I've talked about today, leave your comments on them below and let me know what you thought of them. And, of course, any suggestions. I really am interested in reading more books like Hillbilly Elegy, just more books about different people's experiences and how that shapes them, and just like sort of like the politics and the social constructs behind all that. If you have any suggestions on those types of books, then please let me know in the comments below, and also let me know what you're reading. But I hope you guys have enjoyed watching, and I will see y'all again really soon.